Добрий день. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I know many of you probably did not expect that we will talk today in such an extent about Ukrainian displaced who had to flee the war, but this is the topic which is like a pink elephant in the room. I know it bothers everyone, I know it hurts everyone, but a lot of people are lost in very basic understanding of the situation, what is going on with those Ukrainians who arrived to the United States under U4U program, under parole programs, and what do they have to do. And I have to tell you that the information that you will learn today is critical because we have a huge problem in our hands, huge problem for those people who happen to be really between ice and fire because the current immigration policies are extremely, extremely hard. Well, again, my name is Irina Mazur. I'm an immigration attorney. I have my own practice, and I'm honorary consul of Ukraine in Philadelphia. I'm also a board member and practice advisor for Ukraine Immigration Task Force, as well as the chair of the Immigration Committee of the Ukrainian American Bar Association. We are honored today with my colleagues to present this panel in Ukraine Action Summit, which our Ukraine Immigration Task Force has been part of since 2022. Joining us today is a very super lady. You know, you have an image of a Superman in America, but we also have a super lady in America. It's Ann Smith. And today's presentation, thank you. Today's presentation was prepared by her. She is incredibly talented, incredibly smart lady who works for Ukrainians as a head and president of, one second, I lost myself here because we switched devices. Anne is Ukrainian American immigration attorney based in Washington, D.C. She is the executive director and regulatory counselor for Ukraine Immigration Task Force, nonprofit legal coalition of over 200 attorneys that assist Ukrainians seek refuge in the United States. Founded in 2022 to help Ukrainians fleeing the war, the task force publishes guidance on immigration law, provides educational webinars to the public, and consults nonprofits that assist Ukrainians with immigration and resettlement. And I have to tell you, I'm not kidding, she is a super woman. Because everything that Ukraine Immigration Task Force, what we do for free. We do pro bono. This is our duty and this is our call to help Ukrainians who are in need in the United States. But we are also fortunate today that we are joined by two policy experts. Next to Anne is Daniel Salazar. Daniel Salazar is a refugee and protection policy advisor at Global Refuge, one of the largest national faith-based nonprofits serving refugees and other immigrant communities. And next to Daniel is Krista Carlson, and she is Vice President of Community Building and Engagement at Welcome.us, a nonprofit, non-government organization founded in 2021 to equip and empower Americans to participate in the work of welcoming newcomers. Please make sure, I will actually spell for you the website, it's welcome.us. And they have been instrumental in building grassroots communities to sponsor and support Ukrainian parolees. Parole is a special term that we will explain later. But it's essentially Ukrainians who were allowed to enter the United States, who had to flee the war, and they came with a special status, which is called parole, since 2022. She's also Ukrainian-American based in Washington, D.C. Please note that the information that we share today is only for the informational purposes. And we, as lawyers, as boring lawyers, this information does not constitute legal advice. We will talk to you in plain language because immigration law is extremely complex. It's hard to understand it, but our experts will do the best to share the information that they want to you, so you can take it back to your representatives and you would sound alarm for Ukrainians who are in the United States right now facing big legal challenges with their status. While our goal is to provide relevant updates on various aspects of the immigration law and policy, we cannot recommend strategies for specific cases. And we urge those with legal questions to consult a qualified immigration attorney. So it doesn't mean that you will come home, you will have a friend, and you will say, Irina Mazur or our experts on the immigration panel said so. This is not our purpose today. Our purpose today to provide you general information about something very specific. With that, I will turn to Ann Smith, who will speak about the current regulatory policies affecting Ukrainian immigration, challenges facing recent arrivals to the United States, short-term protection for those who cannot return to Ukraine, and long-term pathways for humanitarian parolees.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irina. And I just want to mention that everybody here is Superman and Superwoman, and Irina works tirelessly on behalf of Ukrainians and never says no to anything that needs to be done. So I just want to make sure that everybody recognizes all of her hard work and her compassion for Ukrainians in the United States. So I just want to start out by saying that the immigration laws themselves have not changed except for the Lake and Riley Act that was signed on January 29th and the H.R. 1 budget bill that was signed on July 4th of this year. It's important to remember that only Congress can pass laws and only Congress can repeal existing laws. So most of the changes that we've seen so far affect the enforcement or implementation of existing laws, and those direct executive agencies to align their priorities and procedures with the president's intended policies. One of the top goals of this administration is to significantly reduce the number of new arrivals into the United States through humanitarian pathways. A second major goal is to deport individuals who are considered by the administration to be here unlawfully. And a third goal is to remove protections for recent arrivals that allow them to stay in the United States. Consistent with these goals, the Trump administration has issued 210 executive orders since January 20th, with over 18 of them directly impacting immigrant communities, immigration procedures, or immigration enforcement. These executive orders led to the publication of official announcements in the Federal Register and memoranda on from different agencies.
And I would like to ask you, are any of those policies targeting Ukrainians specifically, either recent arrivals or those who have lived in the United States for the last several years?
Although Ukrainians as a group have not been targeted as aggressively as other immigrant populations, there are some concrete changes that put many Ukrainians at risk. These include the indefinite suspension of all parole programs, including Uniting for Ukraine, a major increase in immigration enforcement, and expanded expedited removal that makes it easier to deport non-citizens without an immigration hearing. The administration has also adopted increased scrutiny of immigration applications and implemented numerous fee increases for both USCIS and immigration court requests. And there have also been some internal directives that disproportionately affected recent arrivals from Ukraine, many of whom entered on humanitarian parole. In February, USCIS suspended adjudication of all immigration applications filed by parolees, including reparole, work permits, TPS, and asylum. Although this pause was lifted in June after legal groups sued the Department of Homeland Security, Ukrainians and other populations are still seeing significant delays in processing their applications. And I see some people nodding, so you know what I'm talking about. There were also changes to asylum application adjudication and naturalization requirements, which will impact some Ukrainians. Additionally, the State Department adopted more rigorous screening processes for entry visas and started revoking student visas from individuals who were deemed threats to national security or who expressed certain opinions on social media. More recently, the Department of Transportation published an interim final rule that significantly impacts Ukrainians who drive trucks and other commercial vehicles. Effective September 29th, state driver's licensing agencies may no longer issue commercial driver's licenses or permits to non-citizens unless they actually hold one of only 3 types of employment-based visas. And those are the H-2A, H-2B, and E-2 visas. And they must have corresponding work permits on the basis of those visas. So this means that Ukrainians who have work permits based on humanitarian parole or TPS are no longer allowed to drive commercial vehicles, even if they currently hold an active commercial driver's license or permit. And they can be stopped or arrested and detained for violating this federal rule. And so that has certainly impacted the employment availability for a lot of Ukrainians.
Thank you, Anne, for summarizing these changes and these charges. But here's the question for you, which we actually did not put on the program, but I'm sure a lot of people, they are under misconception that Ukrainians were allowed to come to the United States as refugees. And a lot of people don't really understand, what is it parole? What kind of difference between refugee and a parole? Because even a lot of legislators, they have no idea really in what status Ukrainians were allowed to enter here after the full-scale invasion. Can you please answer this question? It's out of the script.
Sure. So humanitarian parole is simply an emergency entry for individuals who don't have an efficient way to come to the United States through any other pathway. So in 2022, the Biden administration implemented a program called Uniting for Ukraine to provide a pathway for Ukrainian citizens and their immediately family members to come to the United States with the financial support of a U.S. sponsor. The majority of these Ukrainians were allowed to come and live in the United States for 2 years while in valid parole status, but they didn't have any other real rights or any direct way to remain here long-term or even to extend their stay unless they applied for a new period of parole. So unfortunately, when the administration suspended humanitarian parole programs in January 2025, this was a huge blow to Ukrainians and to those who wanted to sponsor them in the United States, because this represented the primary avenue for so many Ukrainians to come here quickly without having to go through the State Department, wait for visa interviews, and really just wait while they were risking their safety in Ukraine. So when parole programs were suspended in January, no new sponsor applications for Ukrainians were accepted, and no new travel authorizations were issued to Ukrainian beneficiaries. So for about maybe 6 months or so, we didn't have any new Ukrainians coming into the United States. And unfortunately, that seems to be indefinitely suspended, so we don't expect to see any more Ukrainians coming through the program unless the administration changes its mind. So I know everyone wants to know what is in store for the approximately 280,000 Ukrainians who are already present here on humanitarian parole. including an estimated 30 or 35,000 who actually were granted parole in early 2022 before U4U was launched. These individuals are allowed to stay here until their parole term expires. For now, the administration has not taken any actions to terminate their parole status, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that this policy continues.
But Anne, what will happen to these Ukrainians once their parole expires or who are waiting for the further extension of their status? Can you please explain?
Yes, absolutely. This is probably the number one question that everybody wants to know for very good reasons. There are some short-term pathways that parolees can seek, and there are some long-term immigration pathways that some individuals may qualify for. So the short-term pathways include re-parole, temporary protected status, and then the long-term pathways would be asylum and immigrant visas.
But also, can you explain a little bit about this current situation when a lot of Ukrainians already filed for their re-parole? Again, this is off the script. I'm just throwing you some additional hard questions. A lot of Ukrainians already filed for re-parole. Their original parole expired. In what status they are right now?
So unfortunately, once your parole period expires, unless you have another status that either allows you to stay in the United States or you have an application that allows you to wait while the application is pending, those individuals are no longer in a valid status. And that certainly puts them at great risk of immigration enforcement.
But if the re-parole will be granted, then what? In what time and date it actually will spring to actions?
So if they are granted re-parole, then their status will renew for as long as U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services decides that they're allowed to stay. So we're seeing typically nowadays about 2-year extensions or grants of re-parole. And generally that dates back to when their parole actually expired, but there are some situations where that's being granted a little bit differently.
So some re-paroles are granted only for 1 year. So again, do not try to understand the immigration policies by your logical mind. Unfortunately, we have such an old and outdated law system. See, I woke you up a little bit, right? Because it's already second part of the day, so I had to say something to bring your attention. Yes, that's what I always explain to my clients. You use your logic as a human being, as a smart human being. But unfortunately, it's not applicable here. It is what it is. It is what we have. And that's why we have you, so you would deliver later this message to our legal representatives. Okay, Anne, are we coming back to TPS question right now?
That would be
okay.
Great. Yeah.
So let's begin from explaining to our audience, what is TPS?
So TPS is one of the short-term protections that I mentioned for Ukrainians. TPS is temporary protected status. And this is simply a protection, not really considered to be a separate immigration status, but it is a protection that allows individuals to temporarily stay in the United States while their country is experiencing conflict, disaster, or other extraordinary conditions. So Ukraine was first designated for TPS in 2022 and then redesignated for a second term in 2023. In January of 2025, the previous administration extended Ukraine's second TPS term, which was set to expire in April 2025. But the extension period now for the second term runs through October 19th, 2026. And Ukrainians who apply for TPS now and they're approved for TPS will be allowed to stay until the end of the second term. And they will also be able to apply for employment authorization on the basis of TPS. So as of now, Ukraine has not been redesignated for a third term of TPS, and that would have opened eligibility to a new pool of applicants who arrived after August 16, 2023. So for now, that is really the only, TPS is only available to the limited pool of parolees and others who meet the requirements.
And I have another tricky question to you, because it's a very common question. A lot of Ukrainians are asking me, well, if we arrived after August 16 of 2023 and we just filed the application for TPS, an application was accepted and they took our money, so we will be okay, right?
Well, it depends on the status that they filed for. So specifically for TPS, it really depends. If individuals qualify for a TPS on paper and they filed an application on time and they went through all of the procedures, submitted all of their evidentiary requirements, if they have a pending application, they are allowed to stay while their TPS is pending. Now, likewise, if they had TPS previously and they applied to extend their TPS through October 19, 2026, if they filed on time and submitted everything correctly and remain eligible according to the legal requirements, then they are also considered to be in valid TPS status while that application for re-registration is pending. But there are other applications that don't really help create any lawful reason to stay in the United States. So, for example, if somebody's re-parole expires, or if somebody's visa expires and they haven't filed, for any other status, then just having a pending application, say for re-parole, does not give them any other status.
But Anne, if somebody arrived here after August 16, 2023, and they decided to file for TPS, what will happen? What is the decision that the immigration USCIS would issue in those kind of cases if somebody filed after the designated date?
So, unfortunately, the requirements for TPS are very strict. The cutoff date is August 16, 2023. If an individual arrived one day after that, they're not eligible for TPS. And we have had people apply. We've had people denied. Unfortunately, that is just how the law works with regard to TPS.
You will still be my friend after all those questions, right?
Of course.
Well, I will just add a little bit that I've seen cases where people who arrived after August 16, 2023 applied for TPS, and they took the sign that they were issued receipt as the fact that the immigration actually accepted their application on its face. Well, unfortunately, they got denials. A lot of them got denials, and they were transferred into the removal proceedings. So in a simple language, their cases were transferred to the immigration court in front of the immigration judge. So those people will be deported from the country. And I'm saying as simple as it is.
Yeah, that's very true. And so just really quickly, I want to let people know that TPS is a protection that's available for individuals in any immigration status or lack of status except for lawful permanent residence. So it's something that people can take advantage of even if they came here, a few years ago or even 10 years ago and kind of, hid from sight. They can still apply for a TPS and take advantage of that protection and that employment authorization with TPS.
Are we going back to question number 8?
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Anne. So what about those Ukrainians who don't qualify for TPS? What they can do to remain in the United States longer?
So we talked a little bit about reparole. So those who, I meant to also mention that in order to apply for TPS, you have to be a national of Ukraine. So you cannot be a national of another country unless you also have Ukrainian citizenship. So we do have a number of families that came here on humanitarian parole, where, maybe one of the people in the family, say, the mom is a Ukrainian citizen, and then maybe the kids are not Ukrainian citizens. Unfortunately, unless they have the ability to show that they are Ukrainian citizens, they're not able to apply for TPS. But it's okay to hold more than one citizenship and apply for TPS for Ukraine. So I just wanted to make that clear, as long as Ukraine is one of the citizenships. So for people who don't have that eligibility for TPS, they are able to apply for reparole. And that's called reparole, is simply another term of parole. And they can do this by applying to USCIS and explaining why they must remain in the United States. So they will need to show urgent reasons that prevent them from being able to leave, and they must submit evidence of how they or someone in their family face great harm if they return to Ukraine. And that must be more than simply citing the war and the dangerous conditions in Ukraine. So if USCIS approves their reparole, then they can stay through the end of the new period and apply to renew their work permit on the basis of reparole.
Another question of the script. Anne, can you please tell us how much does it cost for average Ukrainian in the United States to apply for reparole?
So that is also a great question. We just had a number of fee changes and a couple of increases. So to apply online for reparole, it's $580 per person. And that means, even if you have a baby, if you have an infant, you have to file a separate reparole application for each person in the family or in your household. So that's $580 online, and if you file by mail, it's $630. Individuals who are eligible for a fee waiver are able to apply for that fee waiver and send their applications in by mail. Now, there is a new fee that was implemented. This just came into existence. Those individuals who are going to actually be granted reparole now have to pay an extra fee of $1,000 per person, and that's called the parole grant fee. And that fee will be due before the actual grant of parole is issued. So we do have a little bit more money that people are going to need to come up with. And that does not include the fees for employment authorization on the basis of reparole, plus the additional filing fees for those employment authorization fees. So that's a great question.
So basically it's more than $2,000 per person if you're applying for an adult who also needs employment authorization. So if you would calculate by average family, it's enormous amount of money for the family. But for all that great expense that Ukrainians now would have to pay, how long does it take to get a decision from the USCIS, and how many Ukrainians are being approved for reparole? Do you have any statistic?
So, well, the good news is that we are finally seeing a number of reparole approvals. And I say that's good news because there was a period when nothing was being processed. And then there were a couple of months when a lot of Ukrainians were being denied. So that's the good news. The bad news is there are significant delays in the processing of reparole. So we've got staffing shortages, record backlogs at USCIS, and there are some internal investigations taking place by the Department of Homeland Security. And those investigations are both on the sponsor side, looking into potential sponsor fraud, and also on the parolee side. There were some individuals who are being investigated because they didn't really meet the initial eligibility to come on Uniting for Ukraine, but at the time they were allowed to come anyway. So those things are all happening, and we're seeing those processing times range from 8 to 14 months. So, after paying the high fees and then waiting that long, not knowing whether or not these, parole applications are going to be approved, that's something that is, very frustrating, understandably. So as to your other question of how many Ukrainians have been approved, we don't have a number yet on reparole approvals. USCIS only publishes the aggregated data on all humanitarian parole applications. And that data encompasses all parole applications from everybody around the world, including people filing from abroad, which is actually the majority of parole that is requested. So we don't have those numbers, but we have seen, at least, several hundred cases at this point approved, just from what we're seeing anecdotally from our own, clients and some of the attorney networks that we speak with. So we are staying on top of this, and we're looking for any trends that would be worth sharing with everybody.
One little comment I would like to make, that initially when the reparole process was created, there was no deadline when Ukrainians could file for reparole. Later in the summer last year, the deadline for reparole was established. It means that Ukrainians cannot file for reparole sooner than 6 months before their current parole will expire. And what I saw last week and days before, that a lot of Ukrainians who actually filed too early, they got denials for their reparole simply based on that reason. So what they can do, and if they actually have denial of their reparole for filing too early.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So this is a very new trend that we are just starting to see. It's kind of between a rock and a hard place because you've got these really long processing times. Unfortunately, if their parole expires, they're not in lawful status, they're not able to work. So people are trying to file, proactively well in advance, and now they're getting penalized. So one thing that Ukrainians can do to try to speed up the processing of their applications is to file expedite requests directly to USCIS, especially those whose parole is expiring soon or already has expired. USCIS might consider expediting some of these requests if the applicant is able to show either severe financial loss or an urgent humanitarian situation. But keep in mind that parole is already considered an urgent humanitarian situation for USCIS to even grant it. So people would really have to show, either severe living conditions or illness, disability, death of a family member, job loss, or loss of critical benefits. And we have people applying for expediting multiple times. There's no penalty specifically, but there's also no guarantee that USCIS will grant an expedite request. We also have some Ukrainians who have had success with engaging their members of Congress to help get things moving at USCIS on their application. This is particularly effective if their local congressional office is sympathetic and, certainly something that Ukrainians might want to take advantage of. But keep in mind, too, that congressional offices are absolutely swamped, and especially with these types of requests. So it really helps to have a very compelling story and, maybe even engage the local media. And sometimes USCIS will deny these expedite requests. So we never really know with them. It's sort of like a magic 8-ball, but there aren't a lot of really good answers sometimes.
One practical advice that I would like to offer to you, if you actually need to reach your representative, just remember, you always have your representative in the House, right? And we have 2 senators in each state. So you never know to whom to reach. So look how your representatives voted in support of Ukraine. Look how many bills they actually approved, right? So it will tell you whether they are positive about Ukrainian issue, whether they will more likely than not will actually consider that you will not be able to speak with the representative directly in their offices. They have a special assistants who work as liaisons between the governmental agencies. So, but make sure to do the homework before you actually go to a particular office, because you don't want to be stuck in a limbo. Go prepared, go with copies of your documents, with full description of your issue, and try to do all the work for them before loading that work on their shoulders, okay? So try to be organized and have everything with you. And that way you would be able specifically to request them, I need this and this and that. Please help me with the following. Okay. And while Ukrainians wait for TPS or re-parole, are there any other options that would allow them to stay in the United States?
Yes, some Ukrainian parolees could consider applying for asylum. And this would allow them to remain in the United States while their asylum application is pending and apply for a work permit as an asylum seeker, at least for now. Asylum is a humanitarian protection that is granted to individuals who cannot return to their home country due to past persecution or a well-founded fear of future persecution in their home country. And that persecution has to be because of their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So applicants have to be able to show a nexus between the harm they suffered or fear that they will suffer and the relevant protected ground. But it's important to understand that that's not enough. The persecution must also be inflicted by the government of the country that they fear returning to. And so if that country is inflicting the persecution or an entity that the government is unable or unwilling to control, then that's something that they might consider claiming in their asylum application. But it has been a challenge for Ukrainians to seek asylum because generally the government of Ukraine is considered to be fairly tolerant by the U.S. State Department and many human rights organizations. So it's something that a lot of people ask about, and some people, maybe apply for, but ultimately it has very, very narrow eligibility requirements.
I would like to say something in a very, very plain language. A lot of people, they call asylum as political asylum, and this is incorrect. Asylum, it means shelter, protection, and political opinion is just a separate ground. And as Anne stated before, we have specific grounds. It means race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So it doesn't have to be political to ask for asylum. But the problem is that the war is absent from those factors. The war would qualify somebody for refugee status, but it's not possible to ask for refugee status while you are present in the United States. Why? Because that's what kind of law we have, period. Okay, it's not logical again, but the qualifying factors, they don't have a war. And that presents a major challenge to Ukrainians. And, well, if the asylum will be approved, for example, if somebody will have asylum, and right now, you should know the statistic. For example, before a few months, New York Asylum Office, they processed about 25 asylum cases per day. Right now, they process 75, 80. Okay? They speed up all of the processing, so cases go quickly. There are basically average 2-3 hours per case, per hearing, and those cases which are old from 2016, which are currently processed too, some people can have a grant, some people can have a denial. Let's stay on the positive. If they will have a grant of asylum, what next?
If they are ultimately granted asylum, then they will be able to apply for adjustment of status on the basis of that asylum grant and also employment authorization. And they are allowed to stay in the United States while their asylum application is pending. And that typically takes years. Now, I will qualify that by saying that in the current enforcement climate, even having a pending asylum application or any application these days does not insulate people from immigration enforcement. It can still happen, but legally they're allowed to stay here and they're allowed to seek employment authorization. And if they're granted asylum, then they can go on to the next steps towards naturalization, hopefully.
And before I will ask you the next question, I want to begin from the fact, and you have to record it and share it with everyone. If you will know someone who would like to apply for asylum, never ever those people should lie to the US government, invent stories, embellish their stories, create fake documents. That would be basically a death sentence for your case, for your chances to stay in the United States. I'm not kidding. People who process those cases, they are very knowledgeable, and the punishment is very severe. So, and the reason why I talk about it like off topic, because we have a lot of consultants on the market who help people to put their story together, but sometimes people don't even know what's written in those statements, in those descriptions, but they end up signing them. Sometimes they don't know what's written there, but they bear sole responsibility for what is written in their asylum application. And I cannot stress enough, everything has to be true, correct, without embellishment, without lies, without any additional information. So, and for those Ukrainians who are considering asylum, and again, we cannot tell people what to do. We can just tell people about the current immigration law. People have to make decisions. But what is important for those people to know about their chances and the process overall?
So, and as you mentioned, we're not able to tell people what their chances are because asylum is a highly individual and fact-specific case. So, one person might have facts that will make a strong claim and others won't. What we can say in general is, as we mentioned, that fleeing war by itself is not a sufficient qualification for asylum unless that applicant meets the other eligibility requirements. And we mentioned, persecution on the basis of their race, religion, political opinion, membership in a particular social group, things of that nature. Also, the harm and the persecution itself have to be significant. So we're talking about unlawful or political detention, torture, violation of human rights, physical violence, or some type of severe non-physical harm. And so those are things, that a person will have to prove in a strong asylum case. So like I said, and like Irina said, best thing to do is to speak with an immigration attorney who handles asylum cases. And that's not everyone in the immigration field, but there are a number of attorneys who do.
Basic rule is what you have to do. You have to remember there are 3 elements that you have to show in asylum case. First element is a qualification, right? Anne already went through those qualifying factors. Then the second element, you have to show that something really, really bad happened to you in the past. Or a next element is that something really, really bad tied to those qualifying factors. You always have to tie it together. Will happen to you if you would return to your country. Correct?
Yeah,
Very simple words, but I always explain it to my clients in that kind of language. Okay.
Absolutely.
And next question, 13.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we talked about some short-term protections. And what are some longer-term options for Ukrainians who want to stay in the United States?
And that is, of course, one of the big questions that we have been receiving over the past few years. So for those who qualify, Ukrainians are able to take advantage of family-based immigrant visas if they have a qualifying U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident family member. Another pathway for some Ukrainians is to be sponsored by a U.S. employer or potentially to self-sponsor for an employment-based immigrant visa, but not all Ukrainians are able to pursue, for example, the employment immigration route. So, for example, Ukrainians who entered on humanitarian parole are not allowed to adjust status on the basis of an employment immigrant visa without leaving the United States. But if they do leave, they will risk terminating their humanitarian parole. Now, there is something called the diversity visa lottery, which is offered once a year and was supposed to have opened in October, but is now delayed by the State Department. This is literally just a lottery that the State Department opens up and makes a number of visas available to people from every country that's on its list of eligible countries. And so far, Ukraine has been on that list. If an individual is able to win a lottery number that's high enough, then they're allowed to go on to the next steps and apply for a visa. It's kind of a series of steps that people have to take, and it takes a few years, and it has to be done in a specific sequence during specific deadlines. So this is something that a lot of Ukrainians actually have taken advantage of, but it is a little bit tricky because of the deadlines. So right now we're waiting for the State Department to publish the 2027 diversity lottery. And it's named 2027 because that's when the final process would actually be complete, but people would apply in 2025, and then they would have to check in 2026 to see if they got an entry high enough, and then they'd have to apply for the visa. And if their parole expires or their TPS expires, they have to leave. They can't wait in the United States for that diversity lottery, process to continue, but they can leave the United States and continue the process through the consulates.
Now I will interpret into very simple language. There are some ways how Ukrainians can actually get their green cards, meaning status of permanent resident. But options are very limited. So Anne already talked about green card lottery, which is not open right now. And second, you have to win the highest number, again, because you're constantly running against the time. Another option is family immigration. So if your spouse or a child under 21 and married of U.S. citizen, you probably will be okay. But if your spouse is only here on the green card, and you have to watch your status. But what happens to those people who actually have mother or father who is U.S. citizen, who have brother and sister who is U.S. citizen? Well, unfortunately, even if they have this family relationship, they will not help them much. Why? Because visas under those categories, processing time for those visas, availability, takes over 10 years. So, and the biggest misconception that people have, they think, oh, if my brother, who is a US citizen, will file petition for me, I can stay in the United States. No. That's not true. The petition itself doesn't extend your status, doesn't give you right to remain in the United States lawfully. So in the end, it's not really a practical option. Another trouble that we see is it's a employment-based immigration. Why? Because again, visas under special categories, it takes years and years to process. So in the end of that process, we don't know if those Ukrainians would be able to be in status in order to finalize their step. That's number one. And number two, as Anne said, those ones who entered on parole programs, they would have to leave and then process. And right now, processing for immigrant visas will be in Kyiv, in US consulate in Kyiv. So for some Ukrainians, it's not really an option. So those options, sometimes they're not really viable, okay? So, and again, you have to talk to an immigration attorney, and question number one, you have to ask, if I will file or somebody will file this petition for me, number one, would it extend my status? Would I be allowed to stay in the United States? Would I be allowed to adjust? It means get a green card in the United States. So you have to look at the beginning of the process and also at the end of the process, because some people, they are under misconception. And if they file something, that will extend their status and allow them to remain in the United States. And I just want to stress, it's not always the case. And what question we have right now?
Moving on to the other panelists.
Okay, we have to actually move to another panel because we talk a lot on the immigration. And
number 58.
That will be my introduction for Daniel. So, Anne, thank you. I still believe that you will be my friend after all those questions. We learn a lot about what's happening in the immigration sphere. And again, if you will follow the website of Ukraine Immigration Task Force, we always have free and most accurate resources for Ukrainians, for sponsors. So please make sure to check the website.
I'm just showing you some of what we have. It's www.ukrainetaskforce.org. And we have a really good Facebook page that you can also access from our website.
Can you say that website again?
Sure. www.ukrainetaskforce.org. Should have put here. And we also have advocacy initiatives on there, which we've also made available here to those of you who are attending your delegation meetings.
Okay. Well, you're here not only just to listen, but also you will have a homework to do. And right now, we are actually moving to our next speakers, Daniel Salazar from Global Refuge. Daniel will discuss legislative initiatives on Ukrainian immigration, recent congressional actions on behalf of struggling Ukrainian parolees, and key advocacy initiatives taken by Global Refuge and other resettlement agencies. So let's welcome Daniel. Daniel, can you please give us some updates on bills or pieces of legislation that have been introduced to help Ukrainians in the United States?
Yes, hello. Thank you for the question. There are two bills really worth being mindful of in Congress this session related to this issue. The first is the Ukrainian Adjustment Act, which was introduced this spring as H.R. 3104 in the House. This would create a pathway to lawful permanent residency, a streamlined pathway to getting a green card for Ukrainian parolees who are here in the United States. As we've kind of talked about, people are kind of doing hodgepodge sort of getting temporary relief, such as TPS and reparole. They're going for long-term options like asylum. The Ukrainian Adjustment Act talks about a streamlined process for folks to adjust to lawful permanent residence. This is the second time this bill has been introduced, as it was introduced in 2023 as well in the House. The other bill worth knowing is the Protecting Our Guests During Hostilities in Ukraine Act. It's a long name, but it was introduced in the Senate in February as S-696. It was introduced in the House the following month as H.R. 2118. This bill doesn't go as far as an Adjustment of Status Act. It talks about basically temporary guest status for Ukrainian parolees who've arrived under Uniting for Ukraine, access to work authorization, and essentially that temporary guest status stays intact as long as there's an assessment by the administration that continued hostilities, the continued state of country conditions justify the temporary guest status in question. So those bills have been introduced this session, which began in January, and they're worth being mindful of. It is positive that all of them have bipartisan sponsors at this point. However, we do have to be candid about their chances in this session, just given the orientation of Congress. Needless to say, there's different dynamics going on right now regarding the shutdown, regarding appropriations, the fact that the House isn't in session for the foreseeable future. Those sorts of dynamics complicate the picture for those bills. These sorts of bills also typically get attached to a larger piece of legislation. They don't get taken up as a standalone sort of bill. And even in more favorable sessions of Congress, getting regularization, getting immigration reform proposals attached to a larger bill has proven very difficult, right? Comprehensive immigration reform, assistance to DACA recipients. A really good analogy to point to as well, or similar situation to point to, is the Afghan Adjustment Act. So this has been a bill that has been reintroduced a couple times. It would provide a pathway to permanency for Afghan parolees who arrived during the non-combatant evacuation operation in August 2021, during the U.S.-NATO withdrawal from Afghanistan and the subsequent evacuation. Around 70,000, 80,000 Afghan parolees received humanitarian parole because of the way the evacuation went down, how long-term pathways weren't in a state to welcome people within a long-term enduring status. So similarly, Afghan parolees have had to do this hodgepodge of temporary relief, permanent relief, pursue asylum, despite what folks are, the fact that people clearly can't return to Afghanistan. And even that bill, even with widespread bipartisan support, very active veteran voices on Afghan ally issues, and continued support, we still haven't been able to get that sort of bill passed. So it is a challenging environment for these sorts of pieces of legislation to get traction in Congress.
Thank you, Daniel, for these updates. From me, I would like to tell you that I was engaged in advocacy many years ago, where simply a handful of us were on the Hill advocating for Ukraine. But I still keep in touch with my representatives, and I have to tell you that many of representatives, they have no idea in what situations Ukrainian parolees are today. They think, oh, Ukrainians have TPS, or Ukrainians have U4U. And Daniel, can you please tell us, aside from those passing of those bills, what else are members of Congress doing to assist and advocate for Ukrainians who are struggling as a result of those recent regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. Anne mentioned it, but constituent services is a big part of that. Members of Congress having staff that liaise with federal agencies like U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. We have seen limited results from that too. I mean, there have been cases publicly reported of when a congressional office essentially pushes the government for updates on individual reparole or work permit cases. There was a public one in South Dakota where the at-large House Republican member there intervened on a family's behalf and got approval. We had one in our own network in Montana, and a family in Billings that was right on the cusp of losing their parole and work permits. And I know that there's some in other resettlement agencies too. So constituent services still matter, and then also oversight is also relevant to this. Representative Quigley from Illinois, who's a big champion on these issues, had appropriations language in the Homeland Security appropriations process to, basically an amendment, but basically talking about Uniting for Ukraine being an important program that should be reopened and restored. There have also been various letters that have come out from different members of Congress about these issues, such as from Representative Baumgardner from Eastern Washington, talking about the need for protections for Ukrainians. There were a lot of letters in April when there were really concerning emails that went out to thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of parolees in air, essentially warning that their parole was about to be canceled. I think that happened on a Friday afternoon when most bad immigration news happens is on Friday afternoons. But there were congressional letters about that, some strongly worded, some more diplomatically worded in response to that. And there have been letters since then too. And I'll be the first to tell you, letters don't carry the weight of law, right? They aren't binding, but they do demonstrate continued engagement and commitment to ensuring protections and pathways for Ukrainians. So they do play a role in kind of this larger advocacy push when it comes to when we talk about litigation and media efforts and other components.
I think it's interesting for you to learn, and as I understand it, this panel will be recorded because we want to know all those Ukrainians who are here in the United States. Don't think that nobody thinks about you, nobody cares about you. There are number of initiatives, which I also want to ask Daniel, what some advocacy initiatives your organization is involved right now, currently working on, because we need to tell people, we need to tell those Ukrainians that they're not forgotten, that somebody cares about them. Please tell us.
Absolutely. So we, as an organization, we endorse the Protecting Our Guests bill, and we have an action alert on our website to encourage people to reach out to their members of Congress. We've also cooperated with different offices working on those letters. So there is one from Representatives Quigley, Pingree, and Capter over the summer, talking about work permit and reparole requests. Basically, as Ann referenced, there was a pause for multiple months. That pause got lifted, and yet applications weren't getting moved on, and it has very real consequences for people when they lose their work permits and their parole. We worked with Senator Bennett from Colorado and others with a similar request just in the last couple weeks, which actually talked about a new kind of policy idea, which is that there needs to be a new TPS designation. There needs to be a new blanket form of relief like deferred enforced departure, because we have this issue of there are Ukrainians who were here before the war. There were those who arrived at San Ysidro, Tijuana before U4U started. There are those who arrived via Uniting for Ukraine and are eligible for TPS. And then there are those who are U4U and are not eligible for TPS at all. And so why not get everyone in one category with one cutoff date? And that's the sort of policy option that we hope to get traction on when we have bipartisan efforts like Bennett and Murkowski calling for that sort of thing. And so, so I would just note that I know it's tough to look for immigration wins, immigration advocacy wins. I think it is a positive thing that Ukrainians have not faced the same sort of population-wide rescission that other groups like Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans have faced. And that sort of momentum, that sort of even the verbal off-the-cuff remarks that President Trump might make about not going after this population, how can we turn those into broader momentum? How can we keep the drip, drip, drip of letters and news articles and different things to basically keep this issue in the news? I think that's basically the approach, even though, again, it's a discouraging moment in immigration advocacy, but it still matters, and it's always going to matter from our perspective.
Thank you, Danielle. Before we will turn to our next speaker, I would like to ask our organizers, can we have a little bit additional time to our panel, because I took some time, a little bit more? Can we?
I'm afraid we have maximum 10
minutes. Okay, thank you. Okay. So now, finally, we will hear from Krista Carson from Welcome.us. Krista will share some general refugee policy updates, how her organization was and has spearheaded the humanitarian response to welcome Ukrainians across the country, newcomers, access to benefits, and how communities can get involved in advocacy. Krista, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina. Дякую. I think some of your questions for Anne covers some of what I wanted to share, so we're going to be able to respect everyone's time this evening. I would say, first of all, we have celebrated with many of our sponsors who have seen re-parole applications get approved. We've also grieved with some sponsors who saw those re-parole applications not get approved in time. But we're really grateful for the efforts of our sponsors. Welcome.us from 2022 has engaged with Americans who sponsored Ukrainians through Uniting for Ukraine. And part of this program was that Ukrainians required a sponsor in the United States, someone to say, I know this Ukrainian who is seeking safety, I'm willing to help support them, and then submitted their application on behalf of their community. And so we've worked with those Americans, not only directly with Ukrainians who have arrived, but also the American communities who have been changed by the act of welcoming. They've been transformed by the new cultural experiences and the friendships and the families that have grown from South Carolina to South Dakota, from Minnesota to Massachusetts. And we have seen sponsors really step up alongside Ukrainian newcomers in many different ways. And I would say one way is that, I'm not quite sure, I saw the right button. There we go. One of those ways is we've seen more than 200,000 messages have been sent through this QR code. This is a message that will tell representatives that you want to see protections for people who have come through humanitarian parole, and they're receiving the message. We've had in Michigan, this message was sent a lot to representatives, and then they reached out to a local nonprofit asking, what is this program? Tell us more. As Daniel said, our representatives have so much on their plates and they're not tracking as closely as we are. And so they need to hear from us about what we care about. We've seen sponsors go to town hall meetings and they've respectfully addressed their representatives and said, I have Ukrainian friends who are not safe if they lose their status. How can we work together? And they've had responses saying, let's talk more because I didn't know about this issue. And so also through media, we've seen sponsors engage with their local media, and that's something we can offer. If you are interested in getting involved in doing a community event to spread awareness, or reaching out to your local media and you're not quite sure how to craft a story or where to start, feel free to reach out to us at that email you see on the screen, hello@welcome.us. Just mentioned you met us here at the Ukraine Action Summit, and we will prioritize a response to you to make sure that we support you in this work, because it takes all of us in this room and beyond to help raise this issue in a way that meets the urgency of the moment and in a respectful and engaging way that will bring to light the humanitarian needs that we're seeing in our communities.
Thank you, Krista. I would like to ask you a question about those Ukrainians who came here under parole, U4U program, right? What can you tell us about the access to public benefits for humanitarian parolees in the United States and how it changed this year? That's a very, very interesting question. A lot of people are asking that.
These benefits have changed, as Anne mentioned a bit, through the reconciliation bill. Through this bill, that means that the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or government supplemented access to food has been removed for people with humanitarian parole status. Medicaid will be removed in October 2026, and Medicare will be removed in January 2027. And then these additional fees for example, for re-parole that we heard from Anne have also been added. So the $1,000 for re-parole. For a more exhaustive explanation of benefits and specifically how this budget reconciliation bill has affected the newcomer and immigrant community, feel free to take a look at the policy updates page of our website, which is simple to remember, welcome.us.
Thank you, Krista. It's unfortunate to learn that some people would lose and lost already their benefits. But on a brighter note, what have Americans done to welcome Ukrainians into their communities? And also, second question, I will double them. What are some ways that communities can advocate for Ukraine who are in danger of losing their lawful status or facing dire situations, and how they can engage with their elected officials to support those Ukrainians?
There are two ways that I might approach an answer to this question. One is if you specifically know a Ukrainian or a family in your community who is affected and who is fearful of losing their status, and they have a pending application. Just as Anne and Daniel have both mentioned, you have the power to partner with them and contact your local constituency services representative, and that is by filing a privacy release form through their office. That gives them official permission to engage with USCIS on the case and inquire about the status of the case. There are other ways that you can bring attention broadly. It's through media engagement, through going to public events where your representatives are, like a town hall meeting, for example. We've also seen sponsors circulate petitions and getting many people in their communities' names to sign to say, we care about this issue, because that does a lot of the legwork for your representatives to see, oh, there are many people, many of my constituents care about this issue. And so when they see the volume and the care that the community has wrapped along and around their Ukrainian community, that really raises their attention as well. And we've seen not only those private communications, but also broadly at the Ukrainian festivals or community festivals. That is a great opportunity to reach out to media to gain exposure about what the community is facing, because, yeah, as Anne said, it's not something that's highly visible to our communities unless we say something. And it's important, I would say, as a Ukrainian American, for American citizens to talk about this, because we're not in fear of losing our status, and it's what a great opportunity to really come alongside our friends and use our abilities to raise this issue.
Thank you, Krista. I just want to add one comment from me. I have neighbors, I have American friends who always ask me, what can we do to help? Well, turn them into Ukrainian advocates. Turn them into Ukrainian ambassadors. If you don't know how to do it, send them to those websites, but use their persuasive skills, use their constituency, so they would be able to help not only Ukraine, but also Ukrainians who are in the United States. Krista, we appreciate the perspectives from you and everything which is done by welcome.us to help Ukrainians. I just want to mention that we had a very successful informational bureau which your organization helped to create in the Ukrainian Center in Jenkintown, and many people were able to receive the help. And we are grateful to have collaborated with you for the past few years to support sponsors and educate the public. And now it's my closing remark. I would like to thank our panelists. You're wonderful people. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your efforts. I want to thank you for your care. And I want to thank everyone who's present here today, because just imagine if I would sit here by myself, who could hear me? No one, right? But you are here with us today. It means we are big power. Over 700 people have registered for this conference, and this is a big success this year. So it means we would have to turn each of you into an advocate for Ukraine. And yes, you have 4 priorities that you will work and advocate. But today's panel was intended to give you some food for your thoughts, so you would know that some Ukrainian brothers and sisters are losing their jobs right now, are losing their benefits. People are returning, they're leaving the United States. People are living in the parking lots because they cannot afford rent. They're losing their jobs in the United States. Ukrainians who had to flee the war, now they're fleeing the United States. Just think about it. This is going to be your homework when you will come home, when you will talk to your representatives. Scream for Ukraine and for Ukrainians. Sound alarm for Ukraine and for Ukrainians, okay? This is your homework. And big thank you for the American Coalition for Ukraine for hosting us today. And Anne would like to add something.
Just want to add, please be sure to check out the advocacy initiatives that we have sent over for everybody's information and hopefully usage when you speak with your representatives. And also, I believe that Krista has provided this flyer with the QR code as well.
See, I told you she's a superwoman, right? So big thank you for our panelists. Thank you. Slava Ukraini!